is LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation, The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody, and a happy Valentine's Day to all. Roses are red, violets are blue, but they're subject to an 8.5% tariff while we're in the EU. Yes, it's true. I checked it out. And in fact, cut flowers that have been coming in for Valentine's Day, a lot of them from Africa and elsewhere, we're having to pay more for them, nearly 10% more for them, because the European Union puts tariffs on goods that come from those countries, which in many ways was what Boris Johnson's speech today was all about. So Boris today gave the first of a whole series, about 6 we anticipate, Brexit speeches. And what was Boris trying to do today? Well, he was trying to say there's a great big world out there, and that rather fits in with that little ditty. But what he was really trying to do today, he was trying to appeal to Remainers. He was trying to tap in to the anxieties that he sees and hears from his own family and from people in the streets of London who shout four-letter obscenities at him as he goes by. So it was an attempt to unify, to get Remainers behind this great historic project. Let's hear the big part of Boris's speech today.
The UK is the country that is once again taking the lead in shaping the modern world. And it is our stubborn attachment to running ourselves that will end up making our society fairer and more prosperous. In its insistence upon democracy, in its openness, its belief in the rights of the individual, in its protection of our legal system, its skepticism about excessive regulation, its potential for devolving power downwards, and in its fundamental refusal to discriminate between all the other peoples of the earth, and in its central distinction between a political loyalty and obedience to the EU institutions and our eternal love for European culture and values and civilization. Brexit is not just the great liberal project of the age, but a project that can, in time, unite this whole country. So let's do it with confidence together.
So it was positive, it was upbeat, it talked about our traditions and our values. I rather like that bit of the speech. He then finishes up using this word about it being a liberal Brexit, which may seem a bit odd coming from a Conservative. This is a line that's been pushed by Tory MEP and intellectual Daniel Hannan ever since the referendum, and I rather suspect Hannan may have written that speech today from some of the other things that we will go through in the next hour. So it's going to be a liberal Brexit, folks, and it's all fine. And any of you who were on the Remain side that feared it would lead to us becoming isolationist, it won't, because we're going to go global. And I have to say, that part of the message, I was pleased to hear that today. It's not new, but it is actually an important thing to say, that Brexit is not actually this protectionist backward step. In fact, in many ways, Brexit is about getting out of a club that is very protectionist so that we can have cheaper flowers on Valentine's Day and many other things. The question is, he really aimed this from the start at Remainers. But I'm just going to ask you tonight, did Boris, in his speech today, and he made the point that he wouldn't persuade everybody, but he said, I have to try. Has Boris today persuaded you, if you're a Remainer, that actually there's less to fear from Brexit? But just as importantly, has he persuaded you as a Leaver that the government are going to deliver the things that you voted for? Because basically in the speech, he hardly dealt with Leavers at all. Well, apart from abusing one or two of them. I wonder who might be near the top of that list. We'll save that perhaps for later on in the show. So are you persuaded by Boris? Has today's speech changed your mind, or has it been a complete flop, full of mixed messages? If you're a Remainer and you've been won over, call me on 0345 6060 973. Maybe you're a Brexiteer who didn't see enough red meat, in which case text to 84850. Or maybe you're happy that at least somebody is saying something positive about Brexit, in which case tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and you can watch me on Facebook and comment there 2. And I'm going to go for a first reaction to Ryan, a new caller to this show and to LBC, who's calling from Rochdale. Good evening, Ryan.
Hi, Nigel.
So, were you won over by Boris today?
Well, I mean, I voted for Brexit,
Yep.
and I'm 30, so it kind of blows a hole in the hole. Only young people voted for Remain.
Oh, yes, of course.
Which, to be honest, I just think is a London media lie, really, because most young people in the north want out, and they never really discuss this in the media. But Boris Johnson's speech, I mean, I think he touched on it slightly about immigration, but he didn't really get to the issue of why people voted for Brexit, and the real reason is immigration. It is top of the list.
Now, it's very interesting, Ryan. Ryan, you see, now, Boris and Dan Hannan and his friends all think that the Brexit vote wasn't really about immigration. It was and absolutely right to say that democracy, self-government, but actually, surely I think that immigration was the main thing that got people out to vote on the day.
Well, I agree. I mean, in our area, it was 60.1% in Rochdale that voted to leave.
Yep.
And everybody that got out and voted that day, the top of discussion was immigration. Mm-hmm. I mean, and I don't understand Leave, the Leave, the Brexiteers and the government not talking about immigration, because it's the one thing that Remainers have not really got any answer to. I mean,
I tell you what, Ron.
I tell you what, Ron. Everything else.
I tell you what, Ron. I'm going to stop you there. I tell you why. Let's play you the bit of the speech where Boris did speak about immigration, and I want to get your response to it.
We will be able to take back control of our borders, not because I'm hostile to immigrants or immigration, far from it. We need talented people to come and make their lives in this country, doctors, scientists, the coders and programmers who are so crucial to Britain's booming tech economy. It was my proudest boast as Mayor of London that we had 400,000 French men and women living in the British capital, high-earning, high-spending types, while only about 20,000 UK nationals went the other way, lived in Paris. And we've got to stay that way.
Well, Ryan, did you just listen to that? So Boris Johnson has just said that the proudest achievement of being London mayor was the inflow of 400,000 people to London with an outflow of only 20,000 between us and France, and we must stay like that.
No, I mean, this is the big disconnect, Nigel, between establishment politicians and actual people.
Yes.
They do not understand it. I mean, they've sort of said it's about this, that and the other, but the nub of it is immigration. And I just want to say one more thing about this, and it's actually switching it towards Labour. I don't actually understand why the media are giving Labour MPs an easy ride, particularly Labour MPs in heavy vote leave areas, because do these Labour MPs really think that they're going to vote against the final deal and come back to areas that have been heavily voted leave and then vote for those Labour MPs again? I mean, we're not going to, Nigel, we're not going to vote for him. We're going
Ryan,
to
I think...
they don't realise it, Nigel.
Ryan, there are over 4 million people who voted for Corbyn's manifesto, which said we would leave the European Union, leave the single market and take back control of our borders. Over 4 million of them voted Corbyn last June, and I think they're being very, very badly let down by the Labour Party. And I agree with you, there's a price to pay. Ryan, thanks for calling, first-time caller, and Ryan making, I think, perhaps what for me was the most fundamental problem with this speech. Ryan is right. There is an absolute disconnect between the types of people who go to dinner parties in Notting Hill and the rest of the country out there beyond, I was going to say the M25, but maybe beyond just a few postcodes, actually in the centre of London. Boris did not address immigration at all in the speech today. We will be able to take back control of our borders. Yes, Boris, but I don't think people like Boris have any intention of really changing immigration numbers coming to Britain whatsoever. There, I've said it. What does Mark make of it? A new caller from Belfast. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I'm fine, and I have to say, Mark, I thought the positive bits of his speech were great. The trade bits were great. The reaching out to the world, linking up with, a lot of old friends and new, all of that I liked, and I liked the positivity. But I didn't really get the feeling, as a leaver, that he was even trying to speak to me.
Well, I suppose that depends on how you define leaver. You define it as someone who has always supported the UK and, in my case, Ireland exiting the EU, and that's been my position since 1988.
Right.
However, Boris is a politician. He likes the sound of his own voice, and he simply wants to be the Prime Minister. And
Mark, Mark, honestly, are you saying that Boris has political ambitions to reach the top job in this country?
Would I say that? No, of course he has. And every politician's in exactly the same boat. Even Jeremy Corbyn, who a few years ago was simply a backbencher, who very few people had heard of,
so
now has a good chance.
Yeah,
Prime Minister at the next election.
I mean, it is funny, Mark, isn't it? Because during the campaign, the Vote Leave campaign that Boris was one of the heads of, put out some pretty aggressive posters about Turkey joining and mass migration. And here he is today, adopting a different position. So basically, Mark, you're saying to me that your view is that Boris will go for a soft Brexit because that makes it more likely he'll become Prime Minister.
That's what I've always felt.
Well,
I would prefer somebody like your friend, Mr. Rees-Mogg, or even Michael Gove, God bless us, would take, I think, a harder line on Brexit than Boris Johnson.
Yeah. No, Mark, I think, I tell you what, again, another call there from a new caller to LBC who's hit the nail on the head. There are a lot of you out there, I suspect, think that as much as wanting Brexit, Boris is going for that top job. The Prime Minister is in a pretty weak and wobbly position. And I get from Joyce on Twitter, Boris sounds like a Prime Minister in waiting. What a great speech. Love the positivity. Well, I tell you what, however sceptical Mark from Belfast may have been, Joyce on Twitter, she likes what Boris did. That's another vote he's got. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusive in LBC. The time is now 7:15. Boris Johnson today, in the first of a big series of Brexit speeches we're going to get from the government, set out to deal with the anxieties of Remainers, their strategic anxieties, their economic anxieties, and even their spiritual anxieties. Are you keeping up with this? And he was really aiming this speech at Remainers. He was positive about Britain's place in the world. He said we have to have our own laws separate from the European Union. But he didn't even try and address leavers. And I've already had two leavers on the line saying, hey, he didn't even talk really about immigration, and said his proudest boast was that when he was London Mayor, we had mass immigration into the city. But I wonder, leavers, Remainers, are you convinced by Boris today? John is calling from Bristol, another new caller to the show. Good evening, John.
Hello, Mr. Farage. Hello. Yes, Boris's speech, sounded more like an audition speech, really, didn't it, for the top job?
Well, that's a lot of people think that, John.
He doesn't believe. He's like Theresa May. He's like a lot of them, actually. They don't. Theresa May doesn't believe in Brexit. She made that speech before the referendum, saying what a bad idea it is, and it is a bad idea, Nigel. It's a complete folly. It really is.
What, self-government?
No, we've got self-government.
No, we haven't.
Passed most of the laws in this country.
No, we don't, John.
For goodness
sake.
No,
we don't, John.
Up, Nigel. Somebody once said patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel, and you, my friend, are a big
All right, I tell you what, John, should we just close Parliament down? Should we just close Parliament down completely and allow all laws to be made in Brussels? Because most of them are already anyway.
You've been talking non-stop for the last umpteen years. Now then.
Do you accept, John? Do you accept, John? Do you accept, John, that most of our laws are made somewhere else?
No, I don't accept most of our laws are made somewhere else.
Right.
Right, and what laws there are made in the EU, they're ratified by British politicians and civil servants who vote through the MEPs. They vote in the European Parliament. I mean, the way you paint the whole structure is just bizarre. You manage to persuade millions of people that most of the ills of the UK are down to the EU, when in fact we know that most of the problems about the UK are down to British governments of the last 40-odd years. This country's been terribly managed, and damaged by successive British governments, mostly by the Tories.
But John, Boris today,
Labour as well.
Boris today, John, was trying to reassure people like you.
It was spurious nonsense, mate. And you know it. It had no substance. I bumped into a friend yesterday in a shop, right? He just got back from Spain. He's got a friend out there, and this friend of his, she works as a big cheese in a real estate company that buys and sells property all across Europe. Do you know how many British people in the last couple of years have registered with them and gone out and looking for property to buy in Europe to get out of Britain?
Big numbers,
Nigel.
Hundreds and hundreds of thousands.
2 million Brits have registered with this woman's company.
But John,
company, and looking to buy in Europe.
But John, if you can sell, if you can sell a semi-detached house, if you can sell a semi-detached house in South London for 1.35 million, and you've reached the age of 65, and you can move to the south of Spain and buy somewhere for a fraction of the price, it kind of makes sense for a few people, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's some of it. This, what I'm saying, there's people from all across generations, not just old people with loads of money, but lots of people who can rustle up the deposit, rustle up the money to get, and they're trying to get out there before Brexit happens, and they might not be able to go after that.
Oh, John, please, John, Brexit is not going to affect. Do you honestly think, John, that because of Brexit, the Spanish won't want the Brits going there spending their money? Do you really, honestly, truly believe that?
You've come out with the nonsense you've come out.
Do you believe that, John?
Few years about this.
Do you believe that?
Believe what?
Do you believe that because of Brexit, the Spanish won't want hundreds of thousands of Brits spending their hard-earned money there?
No, I'm talking about people who are permanently moving to Europe. Germany, France, Spain, Italy, Scandinavia. These are people, Brits from right across the generations, right across the age range.
John, if you look at Brits living in Europe, if you live at Brits looking in Europe...
right all across Europe.
John, you're not listening, man. You're not listening, man. I've tried hard. It's... Brits that live in Europe live in Spain, France and Ireland, all right? That is where the vast majority of Brits living in the European Union are, and Brexit is going to make no difference to that at all. John, I don't think was convinced by anybody or anything, and he hates Brexit, and Boris hasn't won him over. John O is calling from Newton Abbot, another new caller to the show. John, how did you vote in the referendum? Hello? No, we've tried to go to John O. We failed. We're going to go to Craig in Clapham. Craig, good evening.
Hi there, Nigel. How are you?
I'm fine. So, Boris was very positive about our place in the world, and I love that, Craig. That was good. The rest of it I wasn't very convinced by.
Yeah, do you know what, Nigel? I think you've been a little bit harsh on Boris, to be honest. I know you've made comments about him before about, trying to sort of take the top job and that. But for me, I'm not a big fan of Boris, actually, to be honest. But I must admit, after hearing his speech today, he certainly went up in my sort of estimations for him. And I like the message of, hope. I like the message of trying to bring people together. And for me, that's what leadership's all about, bringing people together.
Well, that, Craig, is what he was trying to do.
Yeah.
All that I've said in response to a couple of callers is it might, Craig, and perhaps you'll disagree with me here and think I'm being harsh and cruel, but it might just have been in the back of his head that if people like you were impressed by those messages, it might edge him a bit closer to being Prime Minister.
And to be honest, I think right about now I'd rather Boris than Theresa because, we voted, for Brexit. And to be honest, I wasn't a staunch Brexiteer before. And I think towards the end of the conversations, I started to get more closer to, the Brexit view. And then when I heard Barack Obama, when I heard Tony Blair, that was the thought.
That was the final straw, was it?
For me. Absolutely. And you know what? I think with Boris, I think he is more true to his words. He's come out and he's, we know about that cabinet meeting a few weeks ago where he wanted to, he was supporting the notion of additional money into the NHS but got slapped down by Hammond and Theresa May. So I think his intentions are good. And I think what he does want to do is fulfil the promises, or not promises, but the sort of, the things that he suggested throughout the Brexit campaign.
Craig, that's my worry.
He can do it.
That's my worry. He didn't mention fisheries once in the speech today. And certainly on immigration, he showed me with what he said today, he's got no intention of making any difference at all. But, Craig, where I'm with you is at last we had a senior political figure saying something positive about Brexit. And as for your comments about him versus May, Craig, I've said it before, the Conservative Party would have a much better chance of beating Jeremy Corbyn with Boris as leader than with Theresa May. So I'm not being unduly harsh on Boris. I'm just saying that a speech that was there to win over Remainers has left a lot of leavers worrying whether he'll carry out the agenda. Great call, thank you. Right, we're going to try again. Jono in Newton Abbot, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
Gotcha. Right. Hello. You're a new caller to the show. Welcome.
I am indeed. So I'm going to start off. I voted Remain. The whole young lifestyle, cliche. But I've just had enough of moaning. I've had enough of being a Ramoner.
Is this a confessional? This is a weak sort of confession. You're coming out as a leaver, Jono, are you?
Yeah, I've just had enough, and I just find this speech being like the first time that anything slightly positive has come out from one of the big boys in the political game, and it's quite nice because when you're getting that Ramona mentality, you just think it's the EU or nothing. You just think once the transition period's over, it's just going to be like a barren wasteland.
Yeah. And actually, Jono, those of us that have been campaigning on this for a quarter of a century have always said there is a great big world out there beyond the European Union. And the ability to engage and to do stuff on a much closer basis with the Commonwealth, with emerging economies. Actually, if we get this right, it's going to be quite exciting. My worry is if we finish up leaving the EU, but tied to its single market in some way, that'll make it harder to do deals with other parts of the world. So it's kind of an opportunity, Jono. We've got to grip with both hands and make the best of it. But you like the positivity, yeah?
Yeah, I just like the kind of idea of actually being able to, crack on, be, that great British spirit of again. And
but do you know something? Great story, this, Jono, about leadership, about positivity. Trump, whether you like him or hate him, Trump at Davos was going around Davos. This was a report in the New York Times, not his friends. Trump was going around Davos, shaking the hands of billionaires, looking them in the eye, saying, when are you going to invest in America? Come and see me in the Oval Office. Now that is being positive. That is selling your country. And actually, I look at Theresa May, and she's almost apologetic about Brexit.
Oh, I agree.
And apologetic about... I mean, it's time to be a bit prouder of who we are, and that bit of it, Jono, I'm with you. Boris got that right, and I'm pleased that you've come on this show to announce your full conversion. Well done, Jono. Thank you very much indeed for your call. Well, there you go. Positivity, it's amazing what it can do. It can do it in business and it can do it in politics. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30 and some breaking news from Zimbabwe. Opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai has died. A spokesman for his Movement for Democratic Change party has said. Don't know the circumstances, more about that in our LBC bulletins. Now, one of the things Boris wanted to do today was to appeal to Remainers, and to do so by saying, look, we're leavers, but we're nice leavers. We're not those nasty leavers. And he did this by, to begin with, attacking UKIP.
I'll tell you what, it's very striking, isn't it, since the Brexit vote, that the fortunes of UKIP, the one stridently anti-immigration party in this country, have gone into a long-deserved eclipse. And that is, I think, because people feel they are being heard in their desire, at least, for control.
So there we are. You don't need UKIP anymore. Trust us, because we are very, very good at lying to you over immigration, at election after election after election. We keep promising we'll reduce it to tens of thousands, and we never, ever do. But I would say to Boris, very interesting that in another part of the speech he says, though we must consider the effects that large-scale immigration, unskilled immigration, has had on wages. Do you know what, Boris? When I was talking about that, you were slating me for it. So actually, we are perhaps in some ways beginning to drag you onto the agenda we've always argued about. But he also couldn't resist being personal as well.
It's not some great V sign from the cliffs of Dover. It is the expression of a legitimate and natural desire for self-government of the people, by the people, for the people. And that is surely not some reactionary Farageist concept.
Well, there you go. There you have it. The V sign, by the way, in the referendum was not the British people giving a V sign on the White Cliffs of Dover to everyone south of Calais. It was a big V sign to the political class in Westminster and the big banks and the big businesses and Obama and the global leaders who tried to make us stay part of this awful European Union. So, yes, and so by saying that he doesn't support me, then that again shows the Notting Hill class set Remainers what a really very, very nice person he is. I would suggest he should be really, really careful about this, because whilst people had lots of different reasons for voting Brexit, overwhelmingly, the key issue that made people vote Brexit was getting immigration numbers down. Indeed, polling conducted in the month of the referendum showed 72% of the population wanted immigration reduced. And when people were asked if, post the referendum, current numbers of EU migrants carried on as they are for the next 10 years, would you be unhappy or happy? And it was 58% unhappy and 16% happy. So be a little bit careful, Boris, about accusing the arguments that I've made and people in this country who believe in them. Be a little bit careful about calling them reactionary, because actually they're in a majority. I don't think Boris intends to do anything about immigration at all. Barry on Facebook says, Boris didn't need to convince me. We're going to be okay. We're going to be independent, free, and it sounds good to me. Mick says, this speech should have come from May. She's the captain of the ship, and she should steady it. Well, actually, Mick, a whole raft of them are going to give speeches, though we're told that the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, has been barred. Lynn says, sovereignty first, immigration second. Well, Lynn, there are plenty of people who think like you, but every piece of polling showed that actually the key motivator for Brexit voters was getting immigration numbers down. David Netley says, Remoaners will always be negative and Boris won't change that. Well, actually, we had Jono on, didn't we, from Devon, before the break, who was a Remoaner, and he's given up, and he's convinced, and he's backing the Brexit cause, so it is possible. Ricky is calling from Hackney, a new caller to the show. Good evening, Ricky.
Hi, how are you? All right?
I'm fine. I'm sort of, Ricky, I'm thinking, I'm pleased Boris is being positive. I'm pleased someone's making the argument for our place in the world, and I like all of that. But I just fear, Ricky, that actually, whilst trying to please Remainers, I think there'll be millions of Leavers looking at this speech and sucking their teeth a bit.
Well, I'm doing a little bit more than that right now. Every time that guy opens his mouth, I get madder and madder and madder. This guy, about 5 years ago, was promoting an amnesty for up to 1 million illegal immigrants. Can you remember that?
Ricky, well remembered. I do remember that when he was Mayor of London. Absolutely.
Daniel Hannan has been promoting the virtues of mass immigration days within of the Brexit vote. We've had some figures released there about 2 months ago where we've had 573,000 immigrants in the last 12 months. So if you bear that in mind, that's 18 months ago since we voted for Brexit.
Yep.
That's up to 900,000 migrants. That's going to work out at a rate of 2.4 by the time we do get out of Brexit. We didn't ask for this extension period. The guy is crazy. What? I mean, if he had any integrity in the first place, he would have walked out of May's government, the time when she took him like a naughty school kid out to Florence and gave that humiliating speech. Do you remember that speech?
That was awful.
Florence? That That was absolutely tearful to listen to that.
Yeah. So, Ricky, you're absolutely right. There are this group, the posh boys, as I call them, within the Tory party, and they basically believe in open borders. They won't quite say it in public, but they'll just say, well, of course, with Brexit, we'll get control back. But the point is, Ricky, they don't intend to use that control.
I think personally, the only way Brexit could be saved right now, stop it from being diluted, sabotaged, is if you went back to UKIP, ran UKIP solely on Brexit, leave economics and whatever domestic policies to someone else, just take you as a UKIP coalition Brexit secretary, and I think that's the only way this mess is going to be sorted out.
Well, Ricky, I tell you what, let's see what happens to UKIP on Saturday, because they have their extraordinary general meeting taking place in Birmingham, and it will decide whether Henry Bolton stays on as leader or not. And there are one or two of us quite fearful for what may happen to the party as a result of that day. Ricky, thank you for your call. And Ricky, as I suspected, a lot of people will feel that Boris actually isn't really going to deliver them quite what they wanted from Brexit, quite by a long, long way. David is calling. Another caller from Hackney. No, it's Daniel. It's Daniel. Good evening, Daniel.
Morning, Nigel. I just wanted to say that it was a very, very nice speech, very inspirational. Boris does that very well. However, the problem with all these speeches is they're just so light on detail. We need to get knowing how are we going to fix the Irish border issue. We need to know how are the integrated supply chains on which British exports depend going to work outside the single market. Now, there are models for how this works. I mean, Canada and America are not a single market, but we still have not heard the details, and we need to know those.
Daniel, I think you're absolutely right. It was a speech that was high on rhetorical flourish, but there was very little detail, and there were big areas that were not even discussed at all. I mentioned fisheries earlier, not discussed at all. Immigration was completely fudged, although he said he was proud of presiding over mass immigration as the Mayor of London, and the Irish border wasn't discussed in this speech at all.
What would be your preferred way of dealing with, as I said, supply chains that go crisscross the channel non-stop outside of the single market?
Well,
where you need a lot of regulatory alignment for that to work. What would be your preferred model?
Well, my preferred model would be not to be part of the single market, Daniel, and to have a grown-up, sensible FTA, free trade agreement, between us and the rest of Europe, for whom we are this fantastic market. I still would love to think that's where we're going to get to, and we may get to it, Daniel. We may get to it, despite everything Barney has said in the last few weeks. My feeling is we'll be offered that on trade on goods, but not on financial services, which will give the government a big headache.
It's not so much finished product goods that I'm worried about.
No, I get that.
Parts for good. That's the thing that concerns me, because I think there's a bit of a myth in this country that we don't make anything anymore, but it's a myth that has a grain of truth in it. And the grain of truth is we don't make finished products anymore. And that's that's the thing that always concerns me the most about Brexit.
Yeah, I mean, Daniel, you're right. There are issues around supply chains, as there are in many other parts of the world. It's very difficult to know if we do get offered free trade on goods and we accept it, then you won't have a problem with that argument at all. But could we accept a free trade deal on goods, but nothing in return for services? That's another debate we'll have another day. On balance, Daniel, did at least his positivity impress you?
The positivity did impress, but I tend to be a bit too cerebral about things, and my brain, my intellect overrode and went, nope, there's still not the detail.
Well, I don't think anybody...
All the positivity in the world isn't getting us through it.
No, Daniel, I don't think anyone could disagree with that. And thank you for calling LBC, another first-time caller. Whether some people like Boris or not, he's a character. What you see is what you get. The difference between him and Theresa May is he really believes in Brexit, says Frank from Essex. Frank, actually, I do think he believes in Brexit. I'm just not sure he believes in the kind of Brexit that most Brexit voters actually wanted. He wants a liberal Brexit. which is an odd thing for a Conservative politician to say in many ways. In fact, I would argue it's a little bit of a mixed message. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 7:45. One very important area that Boris did talk about was the prospect being pushed for by some of a second referendum, the exit from Brexit, the desire to make us vote again, something that I've been warning about now for a couple of months. I don't want it, but I fear in the end it could. Not saying it will, but it could come. And I've also talked on this show a lot recently about just how much anger there would be if people felt betrayed after voting, despite the world telling them they shouldn't, for Brexit. And I think what Boris said here was important and worth listening to.
More people voted for Brexit than have ever voted for anything in the history of this country. And I just say in all candour, if there were to be a second vote, I really think it would be another year of turmoil and wrangling and feuding in which the whole country would be the loser. So let's not go there.
Well, I think Boris is right. I think it would be. I mean, I can't imagine how bitter the whole thing would be. And he talked in other parts of the speech about, this would be. You must not betray the voters. I don't think Boris actually himself even gets just how angry they would be. But goodness me, they would be. Politicians of all parties are so out of touch with the average man and woman on the street. They need to leave the middle-class dinner party. Occasionally I get from Mirelle on Twitter. And there were elements of this speech that were aimed, I think, at the middle-class dinner party. In order for Boris to convince people, they need to trust him. And I doubt you would find that trust in many Remain voters, is what I get from Ross on Twitter. Ross, the interesting thing is, I suspect after today there are quite a lot of Leave voters that are struggling to trust issues such as immigration. Paul from Warrington is calling me. He's a new caller. Paul, has he convinced you?
He semi-has, Nigel. It's first time on your show. I'm very pleased.
Welcome to LBC.
Watford Gap. I'd have a pint with you, but I don't know. So I think Boris. I like Boris, but in terms of what he does, I think he's very self-politically aligned. I don't. He's a likeable character, is a word for him, and I think that's where he is. But if you look at, he lost his membership in London, didn't he? He lost his. The Mayor of London.
Well, no, he did. I mean, be fair. Actually, Boris's performance, Paul. Boris's electoral performance in London, given that it is now very much more of a Labour than a Conservative city, was impressive. He is a big person. He is a big personality. I think the question, Paul, about him over the years has often been, apart from himself, what does he really believe in? And I think that that is a question that many people have asked. I mean, Paul, let me ask you.
He's very hard to read.
He is hard to read. Which side of the divide were you in the referendum, Paul?
I'm for him. I want it out, and it's a strange thing because going back to the early days, my father voted to stay in.
Yep.
And my father's dead now, and by the time it was like 1997, he realised what was going on, and it's like he said, it's in effect. The way it's designed is designed from Nazi Germany, the way it's designed.
Well, some people think that.
Can I just finish? If the EU actually had the same as every other country, if they said, right, we have a vote from all countries, all put your votes in, this is what we want, and they listen to it, I agree with you. I think people would stay in and they'd feel safer. And it's the fact that someone can just change something and you've got no say. And if your own parliament hadn't got a say in it, where are you?
Well,
you might as well be sitting in a jail cell.
When it comes to EU law, national parliaments and national voters can't change it, and that is one of the great fundamental democratic objections. So, as a leaver, Paul, do you think Boris is going to be able to deliver the Brexit that you voted for?
I think his intentions, he would try to. But I think he'd be manipulated by people behind the lines, even people that are more behind the lines of even Theresa May, because I don't even think she's advised. I think there's a selection of panel that advises people what to do. They have the spin doctors, as Labour did with Mr Blair and Alistair Campbell, whoever they were. And I think that's what goes on behind the lines. There's people behind the Prime Ministers that really run the country. they're just...
Well, there are big, powerful influences in politics, of that there's no doubt at all. But in the end, these are human beings who should make their own minds up on things. Paul, I thank you for your first-time call. It's not about positivity, it's about accepting reality and dealing with it. Dreamers should wake up. Nobody will ever convince me about Brexit. I get Boris doesn't get my vote for PM. Mog is the only one. David says on Facebook, Boris at least made a start. Let's see if the rest follow through. I think in terms of our place in the world and not being tied to EU law and being positive about things, David, I would agree with all of that. I just feel that when he goes off and starts talking about it being a liberal Brexit, about the fact that his greatest achievement as London mayor was mass immigration into London, then, David, you start to get into some very mixed messages and very much the argument, I think, of the metropolitan elite. Frank says, fed up with hearing that the economics is a problem if we leave the EU. Well, Frank, I promise you, they will never stop telling us that. Just as they told us the exchange rate mechanism was vital, it was a catastrophe. Just as they told us that if we didn't join the euro, we'd go down the tubes. Thank goodness we didn't listen. And it's the same crowd telling us that if we leave, it'll be a disaster. Their track record is abysmal. Not everyone likes Boris. Dave in Leeds says, the greatest mistake of the Leave campaign was to allow Boris anywhere near it. He is the Trump of British politics. Dave, you mean that as an insult, but kind of Trump won and Brexit won, so, you can be surprised sometimes. Matt is calling from Manchester. Good evening, Matt.
Good evening, Nigel. Pleasure to speak to you.
Pleasure to speak to you, and you've never called me before, so what's motivated you tonight?
I listen to the show pretty regularly, and I actually am a bit gutted I didn't call you when you were asking the sort of more broad philosophical questions about nationalism and stuff, but I've got the time, I've worked up the courage.
Well, I tell you what, given I can tell you know about this subject, you don't need courage. You're on LBC, the floor is yours.
Okay, I think Boris the strategy he's taking isn't going to be very effective because the difference is, you guys have kind of hit on that it's not about economics, it's a cultural thing. And I think that there are two conceptions for what being British is. I think there's two conceptions there's two cultural identities at war with each other on the Remain and the Leave side. And I think this is why the Leavers in particular are frustrated because Remainers aren't getting behind Brexit, so to speak, because it's not what being British is they're two different ideas, right? They've got two different endpoints.
Yes, and is Boris's view of Britishness, is it, as I suspect, a very metropolitan London view of Britishness compared to what?
Well, he's trying to pitch it that way. The Remainers in particular know what he's doing. He's trying to soften this sort of identity up so it's more palatable, but I don't think it's going to be very effective. If you look at when Trump tries to be conciliatory, it doesn't really work very well. He still gets his head bitten off because the people who are against him see a different speech compared to his supporters. There have to be studies on this to suggest that psychologically people react differently. Their core fundamental beliefs shape how they perceive the speaker, and I think that's what's going to happen to Boris. Even if he's trying to be conciliatory, even if he's trying to... It
won't work, because he's not... Yeah, OK, Matt, no, I get the point. I thank you for the call. I've got time very quickly to go down to Sidmouth to Sue, another new caller to the show. Good evening, Sue.
Hello, Nigel. I'm just ringing really quickly. I've just sent Boris Johnson an email. I don't know if he'll ever get it.
Right.
I get the feeling his hands were tied behind his back. He's probably jet-lagged. I'd like to ask him when he stopped and why he doesn't get back on his bus, go around and meet the people who are all working so hard. There's a guy in Yorkshire. He's raising rhubarb by candlelight. Mm-hmm. Now, he's not the only guy. There will be people all over this country who put their faith in him. What is he doing?
Well, so your feeling, Sue, you rather agree with me that this was an intellectual speech aimed at the metropolitan middle classes, and it actually sent mixed messages out to Brexit voters, didn't it?
It was very empty, Nigel. It was extremely empty. I think this guy's got so much more to him, but I have a feeling that he has actually had his hands tied. It's almost as if this is just a series of exercises, and I'm beginning to despair.
Yes, well, Sue, it's interesting, isn't it? The objective today was to convince Remainers that Leave's going to be okay, and he might have convinced a few with the positivity and the global, with sort of global view. But I think what he's done is left a lot, perhaps millions, of Leave voters worried whether they're actually going to get the stuff that they voted for, because that's how I feel this evening. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. Coming up at 10 tonight, it's Ian Collins. But up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you. Coming up at 9. In the spirit of Valentine's Day, it's a legal hour family law special. Family lawyer Neil Russell is here to talk about divorce and financial settlements. So your questions on that at 9. We'll also talk about prenups and cohabitation agreements. First of all, though, Labour has launched a radical plan demanding animal welfare for the many, not the few. Are they right that urgent action is needed to protect animals and the rights of pet owners? 0345 6060 973 from LBC. I'm Clive Bull. It all starts next.